Well, a very warm welcome back to Talk Norwich City. It's Jack Reeve alongside Connor Southwell of the EDP and the PinkUn. To reflect on the season so far, what we witnessed on Tuesday night against Sheffield Wednesday, plus plenty more, I am sure. Connor, I've really enjoyed our catch-ups throughout this season because I often leave the call feeling upbeat and optimistic. I got to spend half an hour with a friend chatting through Norwich, and actually the most part of the conversation this season has been around the progress and where we're going and the potential of top six. I have a feeling that the next 20 minutes or so might not follow that path.
No, I think you're right, particularly given how close we are recording this to what happened against Sheffield Wednesday on Tuesday night and the capitulation in the second half. I've been pretty upbeat all season, really. I think even in the periods where things maybe haven't looked great and results haven't been great, I think there's been signs for optimism. There still are, by the way, and I think there are some positive stuff that Norwich City have done this year, but I think we've seen probably over the last three games, Blackburn, Oxford and Sheffield Wednesday, where Norwich City should have got 9 points from all of them. They were leading all of those games. They were in good positions in all of those games, and they won none of them. And they took 2 points. So that's the reality of where they are. There's a disparity between probably how they're performing and how their results are ending up. They're conceding really bad goals, and it's probably just been a reminder to everybody actually of even though it doesn't feel like they're a million miles away from being a great team, you can not feel a million miles away, but in reality you still are. So I think we're seeing probably the elements that need to be refined heading into year two of this project, and frustrating, I think, because a lot of it has been self-inflicted, and if it was almost if they were getting played outplayed every week and teams were better than them, I think you could take it. But we've seen them sort of throw games away and concede rubbish goals and just make inexcusable errors, and I think that's probably the major frustration of where we are with this Norwich City team right now, because the stuff that they do from an attacking perspective, you look at the goals against Sheffield Wednesday, the first half, they're intricate, they're complicated, they're good goals, really, really intelligent, effective goals, and they score plenty of them, really good sort of team goals and combination goals. But that's rendered sort of redundant, really, if you can't defend and you concede Sunday League level goals. It's a big disparity between both ends of the pitch, and again, that I think is probably the frustration today, and probably for Norwich fans looking at this season as a whole, I would say.
And it feels like, Connor, we're recording this at a point in the season off the back of probably like an 8-game run where everyone identified it as a real potential kind of period to put a serious run together. And I'm looking at the last 4 home games in Derby and Preston and Oxford and Sheffield Wednesday, having collected 2 points. And I think we led in all of those fixtures, right? We led by at least a goal in all of those. So to come out with a possible 12 points with 2, you add into that the Blackburn performance away from home. It's what we're seeing here aren't isolated incidents in terms of, we're conceding a screamer, maybe like we did against Burnley earlier on in the season. These are, as you said, sloppy goals, very similar game states in terms of Norwich being ahead and often being on top, and then not being able to see that through. I mean, that's an alarming pattern that needs to be addressed quickly.
Yeah, and if it doesn't, then they won't make progress. It's as simple as that. Heading into obviously the second year of this, and I mean it's a damning stat: 30 goals from 30 points. Sorry, that they've dropped from winning positions. It's staggering.
Which I know there's other teams would have dropped points as well, but that would put Norwich City top if we'd have. Yeah, it's
absolutely. Of course, you do have to wrap context around it, like always, because it includes games like the double earlier on the season where they were leading against Leeds, they were leading against Sheffield United. I think most people would accept those were good points. So there are examples like that, but they're 2 sort of far. The other example, Sheffield Wednesday, obviously, Oxford, Derby, Blackburn right at the start of the season, but probably both Blackburn games, really. Even the Burnley game, they were leading against Sunderland. And actually, for a team to take the lead and to take the lead that consecutively, that's usually a sign of a good team. But they've also conceded the most equalising goals in the league, which I guess is sort of correlates with that stat. And that is a major problem. It's really hard to pinpoint why that is. I think what I didn't necessarily agree with all of Yannis Oftorup's post-match assessment on Tuesday night, but what I did agree with is I think it is too simplistic to say it's just a mentality problem. I think there are footballing problems in there as well, and we saw that against Sheffield Wednesday, and maybe the two are interconnected, but just how passive they got in their shape, and we've seen it sort of consistently. They work so hard, they get themselves in front in games, they look like they're in the ascendancy, they're playing really good games of football, and as you say, creating the game states that they want. And then they regress into a passive shape. They concede a really sloppy goal, and it's a lot of huff and puff for the rest of the game, or even worse than that. And that's a real problem. That's a real trend that they can't seem to break. And irrespective of how good you are, how much of the ball you have, the quality of chances you create, if that's a constant and consistent trend and you keep dropping points from those positions, then I'm afraid you end up where they are, which is mid-table, and that is something that has to be addressed next season, because for me it's the big barrier between this team making really significant progress and this obviously not working. So I think it is that big, and I think it is that big to fix and resolve. And it's really hard to know how to do that, because we can talk about the team last season in terms of age and experience. I think people would talk about that team having a lot of mentality, but that also dropped 27, I think, points from winning positions. So this is a sort of trend that has been about for 2 years now, 18 months, and you can kind of accept the errors and the naivety if you're 2-3 months into a season, but to be 7 months into a season, March, and to have been in this situation so often and still to look like a team that's in it for the first time and doesn't really know how to react and respond, I think is concerning and is alarming. And you can be as optimistic about the long term as you want, I think, and still accept that is the case. So it's the major barrier for me between this team being, as you said, one of the Championship's best, because the first half against Sheffield Wednesday they were, and they look like one of the Championship's best. The problem is they quickly look like one of the Championship's worst when they produce the level of performance they did in that second half, and that gap is just too big at the moment.
The most frustrating thing, Connor, is you've put together some wonderful work this season, both on video and in writing. You penned a piece earlier this week or last week in regard to Norwich's kind of defensive issues, if you want to call them issues, and actually on purely statistical kind of evidence, they've not actually been too bad in terms of the chances that they've given up. They just seem to concede most of the chances. I mean, you look back at these last 4 home games, just because sadly they're still very fresh in the memory. Basically, every shot we've given up, we've conceded it. What does that fall down to? Is it goalkeeping issues? Is it a mentality thing? Is it a structural thing? Because Johannes will probably be tearing his hair out going, actually, we're not too bad here, but we're still not finding a way to just keep the ball out of our net.
Yeah, and it's a killer, absolutely. And you look at it, and people don't like XG. I know that it's not everyone's favorite stat. I think not that I want to get too deep into it, it's probably a different podcast. I think it's almost named wrong. I think if it was named quality of chances created / conceded, that would be a better use of it. But if you look at that, Norwich don't concede sort of what we would class as high quality chances. I think they're 10th in the Championship for expected goals against. It was 132, I think, shots on target they've conceded this season, which was, I haven't sort of updated this post Sheffield Wednesday, but it was I think 7 teams have conceded fewer than that in the division. So they're not letting teams have shots on their goal that often. It was, this run, I think post Swansea, I think it was 7 goals from 13 shots on target. And you look at that first half against Sheffield Wednesday, where they didn't concede a single shot on target. The second half they conceded 5. So you're right. You can be as dominant as you want. Oxford's a really good example. You can have 77% of the ball. I don't think they created enough, but they probably created enough to win that game. And it's a long throw that one player has headed off the back of another that's fallen to an Oxford player who's unmarked to put into the net. I mean, it's basics. You look at the goals last night. Even the stat, Sheffield Wednesday had 3 corners. They scored from 2 of them. Norwich had 9. What did they create? And that just that for me sort of summarizes it. They're not ruthless enough in their defensive thirds. I think there have been goalkeeping issues. I think maybe the gun stuff has been overblown slightly. I don't think he's maybe been as bad as people would say. I don't. That's not to say it's been his best season by any stretch of the imagination, because it hasn't. So yeah, I think it's probably all of the elements that you mentioned. As you say, it's a mentality thing, but it's a football thing as well. And as I said earlier, you can score all the intricate, complicated, brilliant goals and look really good in possession and confident when things are going your way. But if you can't suffer and if you can't do the basics, then as a team, unfortunately, you're not going to get very far, because in this league, you need to combine the two. You have to have that bit of steel and that bit of resolve about you, because if not, then you end up where they are, which is conceding goals and conceding really bad goals. I mean, I've said this all season, really, but you look at how hard Norwich City have to work to score a goal in a game and how good they have to be. Compare that with what opposition teams have to be against them. I mean, they don't really have to create anything that's decent or what we would maybe even define as a half chance to get their way back into games and to get points off them. And again, we speak about disparity. That disparity from what's needed to score goals compared to what opposition need is just far too great. And ultimately, if they don't address that again, then it's very difficult to see how this progresses. But it's about, I guess, whether or not you have faith in Johannes Torup and whether you have faith in Ben Napper to recruit and coach properly to solve some of these issues heading into year two.
And I guess we are at a stage now, sadly, Connor, where I mean, I've after being one of the most upbeat fans this season, I think I'm looking at the table going, we've probably blown our chances of top six. Whether that would have been a good thing anyway, that can be another conversation, maybe post-season. But I guess we are in a situation now where it is all about the rebuild over the summer and how we attack next season. I mean, what's the mood around the place at the moment? I obviously know what the mood is like from the Barclays stand and the concourse. And after last night, it wasn't too jolly, but that can change quickly. What's the mood internally? Is there still a faith that the right people are around the club to get this kind of turned around ahead of next season? Because we had Ricky Martin on the podcast earlier this week, and he said it's a natural thing to do, but when you keep saying, oh, it'll be fine next season, we'll bring the players in, you're just shifting that pressure further along the line, and then you get to a stage where that can potentially blow over. So it feels like a really crucial kind of 6 months ahead now.
Yeah, it does. I think what I would say about Ben Napper and Johannes Torup is I don't think they're overly emotional. I don't think they're overly reactionary. I don't think they will be dissuade from what they're trying to do based on what we've seen in recent weeks. Because actually, I think they're, obviously people look at results, and that's understandable because that's the way football is defined and league tables and whatnot. But I think there have been good elements. I think parking the stuff, obviously. The way that Blackburn ended was a travesty, really, and it's not an overstatement to say that. But if you look, objectively at the performance over the 90 minutes, Norwich were pretty good. I don't think they created enough, but I think it was a good away performance. You look at Hull, and that was, barring the first 15 minutes, a good away performance. Watford, first half was a good away performance, and obviously the second half less so, but they still managed to survive that against 10 men. You look at those three, and I think it shows there has been progress on the road in terms of their ability to pick up this game model that they want to execute at home at Carrow Road and to drop that into away grounds. I think there has been growth on that front. I think there's been clearly an attacking edge that they've had all season, which has been really positive. And this is the balance you have to strike, because if you try and turn a tap off at one end, you can suddenly find that it impacts the other end. And what Norwich can't do is lose that attacking sort of verve that they've got. So, yeah, I think it's probably seen as expected that there were these issues and there were these bumps in the road. I don't think anybody expected it to be plain sailing, but you are right, and this has probably been a fear that's been growing of mine all season. Really, is that you can only tell people, understandably, to be patient and to wait for so long. You have to see tangible progress, I think, and whilst I think there has been in some areas, clearly in others, and really sort of detrimental areas, there haven't been. And you are, again, it comes back, I think, to faith and hope and just how much you believe in those two as individuals and their ability to lead this project and to solve some of those issues. And I think Johannes has proven he can solve issues. I think he's probably been a little bit more pragmatic than some people have given him credit for at points during this season. But equally, there are times, and we saw it on Tuesday night, where it just felt very passive and reactive, and clearly that there needs to be a better balance struck in terms of how they respond to those type of situations. So, yeah, I think all in all, we're probably where people internally expected. I don't get the sense there's any sort of disbelief in what they're trying to do and the way that they're trying to take it, and in the people or the coaches and the figures that are leading it as well. And If anything, I'd probably expect them to double down and to go again in terms of sign more younger players and build a squad that looks like this, but to try and do it better. And it's the second summer window, and you're right. I think, as I said, a fear of mine, I think, is that next season there's so much expectation on it. There's been a lot of talk about 17, 18, and my fear is that the expectations are it'll be all right because Norwich will just replicate what they did in 18, 19. I don't think that is a guarantee, but for me, next season does need to be better. They do need to be more consistent. There does need to be more evidence that this is a team that is growing and that is learning. And my final point, I know you mentioned the playoffs, and I think it's a fair point. My view has always been, I think it's, and clearly none of us have this option, but if you could say to me, ideally, that either you would scrape in this year as a team that was sixth, and but you scraped in and you've got no real chance of going up, or you miss out this season, but you do maybe what Sunderland have done next year and you build and you look like a really good fourth team and you can actually have a chance of going through the playoffs, then you would take year two, I think, as that example. Clearly, none of us have that luxury and have those cards, and we don't know that it's going to play out like that, and it could not. So they have put a lot of pressure, I think, on year two, and it's going to be really interesting to see, I think, how they manage that level of expectation that there will be.
I think we've talked quite sort of broadly about the plan and what is upcoming and what's been behind us, Connor. I want to concentrate on a couple of specifics to kind of finish off this chat, and one is that of Mate Jurisic. Now, this is a man who's been brought in for significant money in regards to Norwich City, but also the Championship. We were seeing videos of our kind of fitness team out with him, working on various aspects of his game ahead of his move over to Norwich. We saw about half an hour of him, and seemingly he has disappeared into the abyss. I mean, what's going on with Mate Jurisic? Because there will be naturally concern from fans going, we've spent all of this money and all we're hearing is he's not ready for the Championship. Why have we signed a player for significant cash that seemingly isn't ready?
Yeah, it's a fair question. It's a really fair question, and it's a concern as well, because I mean, this is a guy who I thought did quite well at Hull. I thought there were some bright flashes there. I thought he faded a bit, and I think he did look tired towards the end. And of course, you have to recognise as well that he wasn't playing a whole lot of football for his other club before he came to Norwich. So clearly, there is going to need to be an element of building him up, but. You're right. I think the concern is that it was initially a thigh issue. Now it seems like he is fit, but there's a focus on his fitness, and we're not going to see him until after the international break. And yeah, it's tough. I'm not really sure how you build up intensity to a league by not playing in it and by not sort of being involved and around in it and seeing what it's like. But there are better qualified people than me to answer that. So it is a concern that they're signing players that maybe don't have that level of robustness. And you're right. I think again it probably asks questions of without knowing the answer and without sort of apportioning blame, because we don't have the knowledge to do that. But you do ask questions about how we've got to a stage where they've sent physical performance team people over there, and a few weeks later he's deemed not ready. So yeah, it's not an ideal situation. It's another one that you have to ask questions of, and just is another chapter in a season that just feels like it keeps on giving in terms of just theatrics and unnecessary sort of situations that feel more attuned to Coronation Street than Carrow Road, to be honest.
I think you and I both, Connor, are those that kind of look at football, but life in general, in terms of trying to take responsibility for actions and not kind of apportioning blame for things outside of your control. I think certain things I look back on, and we have been unfortunate, particularly around officiating decisions and a couple of the injuries. But leading on from Jurisic, I mean, there must be concern internally and certainly externally around the work from just keeping players fit. You look at Gabe Forsyth, you look at Liam Gibbs, at Dobbin, at Nunez, the recurring similar injuries, whether they've been rushed back or not. It feels weird to say that players have been rushed back, because it feels like all I've heard this season is we need to be careful with the workload of Josh Sargent. We need to be careful with the workload of Nunez and Jurisic. And actually what we're seeing is we're not seeing the benefits of those things. We're seeing important players missing for large parts. So Are the club aware of that? Is that something that's high on their list at the moment?
Yeah, I think it will be, because we talk about self-sabotage in terms of mentality in football. I think there's also a fitness point to that, isn't there, as well? And again, this is I always find this a very fitness and injuries and medical stuff is always really difficult, because unless you've got a degree in it or a real sort of solid background in sports science, it's difficult to know exactly what the issue is. And all you can say is kind of ask questions, but also say what we've seen. And I think we've seen a few reoccurring cases, and you mentioned a few. Liam Gibbs, obviously 8 minutes into his return, re-aggravating an injury. Marcelino Nunez, I know it was another hamstring, but he's had issues with his hamstrings all season. And you've got Johannes coming out and saying that he runs the most in the championship. I'm not sure that's a good thing, and I think there is probably a point with him as well, that he needs to almost assess what he's doing and whether his body can withstand the tempo that he wants to play at. And the intensity of Norwich's game is so much that it does put a lot of load on players. So I think there probably is an element with him in particular that, is there something with him where he needs to work a little bit smarter than harder, and choose those areas and elements when he needs to sprint. Clearly, there's the Dobbin case as well. Again, I know it was different calves, but and you've taken him off as a precaution. A week later, after 35 minutes, first time he's really opened his legs up, and the other one's gone. I think you have to ask questions of that. There are other cases as well that we could list. I mean, Gabe Forsyth has been out since November. They've tried to inject it. They're not really sure. I don't think what the issue is now. It's at a stage where it's surgical. You obviously had a Mankel Forsen as well, who initially just looked like a contact injury, and then there was blood in the knee and stuff. And clearly, this is not stuff that can be helped. But then you're sort of looking at 3-4 weeks. So yeah, I think is it bad luck? Is it stuff they're doing? Is it stuff that could be avoided? I think the truth is usually somewhere between all of those factors, and each case is individual, and without sort of going through them, there's clearly 1, 2, 3 that they feel that could have been avoided. And I think there's probably a player profile point in this in terms of recruitment as well. They need to find players that are more robust, because I think it's only Shane Duffy and Jack Stacey this season. Obviously Antti Sienats and Oscar Schwartau as well, but they joined a little bit later, so those guys are a little bit excluded from this. But those are the only 2 players who've been available all season in terms of not having an injury. Clearly, we had the Shane Duffy episode before Oxford. Jack Stacey's always available, and they need to find more of those players, because when you're having to chop and change your midfield, and you're having to constantly change your lineup and ask questions of players to keep going, and they've been a little bit more intelligent this time with Josh Sargent in terms of his minutes compared to how they were in October. But all of that impacts what you do and what you can do on a football pitch. And it doesn't help Johannes Oftorp when he's trying to build something to have that constant level of unavailability. So yeah, it's got to be a key theme that they've got to look at and address in the summer, alongside probably some of the footballing stuff that we started this conversation with.
Where next, then, Connor? It's a big question, and if you knew all the answers, you'd be in charge at Norwich City. But it does feel as if we're at a period now where it's looking forwards to next season as opposed to the hopes for this. What do the club need to do from now until the end of this season? Which players do they need to try and desperately keep hold of? What's the type that they need to bring in? Are there structural changes that need to go on? I mean, how are you seeing it at the moment?
Yeah, well, there's still 9 games, and I don't think it can be a season that's allowed to peter out and, almost like, not to keep going back to 17, 18, but in the way that did. I don't think it can end like that. It needs to end positively. It needs to end with signs that actually there is just cause for optimism and for enthusiasm for what they're doing heading into next season. And I think it's a big moment for some players as well, because there'll still be players fighting for contracts. There'll be players fighting for frontline roles. It's almost, for me, what an opportunity this is for players who maybe are on the periphery, who maybe haven't had much of a chance this season, who are seen as a little bit young and maybe seen for the future. Schwartau, Sienats, let's see what you're about. You've got 9 games to really push yourself forward and to make sure you're a key cog in this team. So it's not nothing to play for, and I think collectively as well there needs to be some performances now and some results. They need to prove that they can grow and learn from the mistakes that we've seen over this season. And if they can end the season strongly, and sometimes it's a weird thing that when teams are freed up and when there isn't that pressure of having to play for something, suddenly you can see Bristol City did it last season, other teams have done it previously. They can put a good run of results together, and then you almost bounce into next season rather than everyone's sort of maybe being in a stage where they're hoping for progress. In terms of the summer, clearly there's going to be another recruitment drive, and yeah, I mean, I still feel optimistic about it. I still think that they're trying to do the right thing. They're still trying to head in the right direction. Would it surprise me next season if Norwich City were a really good championship team? I'm not talking about one that maybe wins the league or is challenging for automatic promotion, but were better, were more consistent, were again amongst the best goal scorers? No. Would it surprise me if they were a mid-table team still struggling? Also no. And that's and nobody can say any different at the moment with any degree of certainty. So yeah, there is going to be a degree of this that we have to wait for, and clearly there'll be major sales as well, and that's about putting your trust in recruitment, because Norwich lost, I think, the top 3 goal scorers after 17-18. Oliviera obviously went, Murphy went, Maddison went, and the next season panned out pretty okay. So I don't think that's sort of terminal in terms of their prospects. It's just about how well they recruit, and clearly they need to do that. They're gonna, I think, need a new goalkeeper. I think they probably need a centre. There are loads of areas we could look at through the team and say that they need. So yeah, they're in an interesting place, a really uncertain place. It feels like the whole thing's at a crossroads. And yeah, in a weird way, I'm quite excited to see how it all pans out.
Yeah, me too. A lovely way to finish, Connor. Thanks again for our chat, although that was slightly more downbeat. I think it's settles me somewhat after the chaos of Tuesday night at Carrow Road. Please do head over and read and watch all of Connor's stuff on YouTube and on the PinkUn website as well. Always a pleasure. Thanks for watching, everyone. Bye-bye.